Hi, this is Tony again at BesideTheFrontDoor.com, and I've had lots of questions asking me about hydrangeas. How to grow them, when to prune them, what to fertilize them with, how to turn them blue. One thing you need to remember is hydrangeas are a very vast and large family that has a wide range of likes and dislikes that they like. We can probably find a hydrangea for you in whatever spot you want to grow it in. There are hydrangeas that prefer the full sun. There are hydrangeas that prefer to be in shade most of the day. There's hydrangeas that do change blue to pink, the flower color, depending upon the pH of the soil, but not all of them do that. So let's take a closer look at those. Now, the winter hardiest of the hydrangeas, the ones that are going to still come back for you every year in a zone 4 and colder, now those are going to be your sun-loving hydrangeas. They're going to want a minimum of 4 hours of solid, good, strong afternoon sun to flower the best, or 6 hours morning, midday minimum. But unless you live in a very high elevation with very strong, intense sun, they can take sun all day. You do have to make sure, like with everything else, that it has enough water. So if you are in a very dry area, it will need irrigation to be able to handle that amount of sun. But those are the ones that either bloom white, a lot of them mature to different shades of pink. Some examples are Little Quickfire and Quickfire, Limelight, Little Lime, Strawberry Sundae. There's dozens of varieties out there. But again, there's no blue acid increasing fertilizer to lower that pH that you want. Those flowers won't be blue. It's just not that type of hydrangea that reacts that way. These are the ones that have the more cone-shaped flowers rather than the cap, the more round, either completely round or rounded top flowers. The ones that will change the blue, like I mentioned, are the ones that prefer the shade. They can take most of the morning of sun. They would prefer some shade in the afternoon. That shade can be dappled light from the trees, or it can be, by a fence or a house or other plants, but some protection from that scorching afternoon sun. Now, most of these are hardy only from zone 6 and warmer. Some of them you might get away with on a zone 5 for your winter hardiness. Check the specifics of the variety you were looking at. Most of these are the ones that are either blue or pink, depending upon the pH of the soil. Do remember that, especially with clay soils, but soils in general, changing the pH on them is a little bit like turning the Titanic. It's a long-term process, and it is always trying to return back to the pH it was originally. That soil chemistry that is in the soil there existing, it's always going to try to return to the pH that it is. So you have to address the pH more than one time. If you are trying to raise the pH for the pink flowers on the hydrangeas, lime, just apply that every year. Apply some lime. And again, the amounts of lime are not specific to like when you put fertilizer on. It is affecting the pH of the soil. So it depends on exactly what the pH now, exactly how much clay is in the soil, exactly what other nutrients are in the soil. So on the back of the bag, they'll give you some guidelines to start. So I would check the pH before you start. Read the back of your bag and put on their general recommendation. If you have some clay soil, you can go a little bit heavier on that. And then check it again in a couple of weeks. It's going to take time for that lime to take effect. And just follow up with it every year. If you're looking to lower the pH to get your blue flowers, then I don't like the aluminum sulfate, because the aluminum can build up in the soils. There have been some studies that have shown that The rhododendrons and azaleas are actually sensitive to that aluminum that can build up in the soils, to have aluminum toxicity. I know that's one of the cheapest ways to bring the soil pH down, but some of the other methods are really not that more expensive, just a fraction. So stay away from the aluminum sulfate. You can go with the soil acidifier, which is an Espoma product, which I like very much. You can go with the garden sulfur. That is also a very inexpensive alternative to use to bring that pH down. Just a tip, if you have something that says it's specifically listed to make your hydrangeas blue, the price has probably been doubled just because it has the words "turns your hydrangeas blue" on it. So stick with your soil acidifier or your garden sulfur. The iron additives can also bring that pH down. And again, it's like turning the Titanic. Keep on applying that every season to keep that pH down to where you want it. Now, it's easier to affect the pH of your soils in a container, because usually those potting soils that you need to use in the container have more of a neutral pH. So you're starting from there and you don't have the clay in there that's fighting you to change that pH. So if you want to grow whatever you're growing in a container instead, either up above the ground or even get one of those grow bags, fill it up with the potting soils and bury it right down in the garden soil there. If you want to protect its roots in the winter especially, go ahead and do that. And you can use the liquid for acid-loving plants fertilizer to keep that pH down and to fertilize them at the same time. Miracle-Gro makes one. Most of the liquid plant food fertilizers make one specifically aimed for your acid-loving plants. Okay, now as far as going for pruning of hydrangeas, that's probably going to be a really in-depth video. I'll try to make one a little later if there's interest. But a quick and dirty tip for the pruning of your hydrangeas is watch them for an entire year first. If this is your new area that you're going in, you moved into a new house, there's existing hydrangeas there, you don't know what type they are, just watch them for an entire year without cutting them at all. That will let you know if it's blooming really early in the spring, if it's blooming in the summer and later. So in general, if it blooms really early in the spring, we're talking daffodil, rhododendron, before your annuals are just getting started, pansies, first thing in the spring and super early summer, it's probably blooming on old wood, meaning that its buds have overwintered, the flower buds. So if you cut them back anytime during the summer or the fall, you're cutting back all of those new flower buds and you will not get flowers the following year. Now, if it blooms in midsummer on, that means it's blooming on new wood, which means you should prune it back in the spring. I try not to prune almost anything in the fall because pruning promotes growth, and you don't want to give your plant the signal that it's supposed to start putting on new growth when it's trying to settle down for the winter. So keep that pruning for the really early spring.